everyone to Creative Mornings. Kia ora te whānau. Tēnā koutou katoa. Tōrua ki ngā mate, haere, haere, haere atu rā. E mihi ana te mana whenua o ngā te toa me taranaki whānui. Kia tātou e whau nei, kia ora. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. So just acknowledging all of you that are here today, all of those that have come before us and cannot be with us today, as well as the mana whenua of this area. Welcome to Creative Mornings. It's May already. It's really hard to get up in the dark. I don't know if you find that as well, but that's okay. We're getting there. I'm very excited today because also I get to introduce you to one of my new co-hosts, Claire Hill. So I might get Claire to come up and just do a quick intro if you'd like. Just tell them very briefly about you for a moment. And Claire's going to share our synopsis for our theme today of Vibrant. So a big round of applause for Claire.
Kia ora, Hana. I'm Claire. I'm quite new to the Creative Mornings family, so I know there are a few new people here as well, so welcome. I'm on a bit of a career change journey at the moment, and my involvement with Creative Mornings is kind of part of that. It's me searching for inspiration and new connections, and I hope that's what you also find while you're here. We've got this lovely image this morning of Vibrant, and I will read you the synopsis that comes with it. So, Vibrant. When was the last time you experienced something that made you feel more alive? Heard a melody toss in with a beat that made your body move. Taken in the view of a lush landscape or sparkling city skyline, bursting with light and shadows. Locked eyes with a striking stranger. Poured yourself into prose that crackles off the page with electricity. Lost track of time in a conversation punctuated by spirited laughter. Stopped in your tracks in front of a canvas in a museum, or a mural on the street with colours so bold and so bright it popped from the paint straight into your synapses. It might not happen every day, but you can live a life full of energy and enthusiasm. You can strive to bring brightness into every interaction, because our world is full of all kinds of vibrant masterpieces, and you are one of them.
Woo! Thank you. Wow. So these themes, for those of you who haven't been to Creative Mornings before or are quite new, there is a global theme every single month that gets chosen by one of our chapters from anywhere in the world. They kind of guide our speaker choice, and sometimes it's vaguely related, sometimes it's very related. They're delightful. Shout out, should I swap places with you? Yeah. Just a quick acknowledgement and shout out to our wonderful 257 space that allows us to host these breakfasts. Shout out to Sarah and her crew today. Big waves to our photographers. Woohoo! And we've got, so Andy is not here today, but we do have Ethan here today videoing our talk. Thank you, Ethan. And then we've got our delicious breakfast sponsors. So there's 6 barrel soda for our speaker gift. Remind me later. No. What? Libertine teas for delicious tea. Coffee Supreme for your caffeination. Oat milk from All Good Oat Milk, or All Good Organics, rather. Colourcraft for the labels that has dropped off me and I don't know where it's gone. Dad Baker for the little cookies, if you're into that for breakfast, and 40 Thieves for our delicious peanut butter. Who tried those little jars with the chocolate and the cinnamon donut? Yeah, how do we feel about those? Yeah? Okay, I'll email them, and they were very excited to share those particular peanut butters with us. And we've got a special sponsor for May, is the Ara Bakery in Ara Valley. So they're just here for May, and so they provided the wonderful bread/toast for this morning. And then obviously my volunteer team, which keeps growing, and I love that. So to those of you who only just came today, thank you. For everyone else that's been here for the ride for a very long time, thank you. And obviously follow us on the social medias. We try and post things. For the most part, we're probably active on Instagram more than anything else. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our speaker today. So Malcolm is a Wellington-based, Pornicky-based improviser and creator of amazing and vibrant shows. Here, a round of applause for the marvellous Malcolm Morrison.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Kia ora koutou. Yes, my name's Malcolm, and I'm an improviser, director, teacher, sellout, general thing. And I made a show recently called It Came From Beyond the Script. It was a improvised 1950s film-inspired small-town horror comedy. As all good arts get, the more deeper you get, the more adjectives you need to describe anything. Comedies in brackets, we didn't really focus on the comedy. The comedy kind of just came because it was improvised. Because, you know, when you're saying things on the top of your head on stage, you naturally will say something kind of dumb and then just have to justify it and go with it. Yeah, so improv, for those that don't know, is making things up in a performative context. Often improv refers to improvised comedy or improvised theatre as opposed to jazz or dance. You're probably familiar, if you don't know, with things like Whose Line Is It Anyway? Although that's a very dated reference now, I realise, and I need to update that. That was my childhood. And that kind of gamey sort of thing that most improv shows do, that's what we call short-form improvised comedy, where it's a single scene or a single challenge that they have to do, which once they're done, like they're very funny, very witty, and then they're done and they move on to the next thing completely. I do the opposite end of the improv spectrum, which is long-form improv theatre. And that's where we're trying to put on an entire hour-plus long play that's completely made up on the spot. Characters, narrative, themes, plot hooks, all that stuff is just made up on the spot. And this was one of them. So this was a horror minimalist, mimed, improvised theatre, which most improv theatre is. Most improv in general is minimalist and mimed. We don't have plot like a set really, or like props, because we don't know what the story is going to be. And the show kind of came from two pieces of inspiration, or two like questions that I had. Firstly, I wanted to bring the tech element on into the forefront of things. I wanted to really, because you got the person in the lighting booth in most improv shows, you've got someone doing sound, often keyboard, and they're often an afterthought, but they are also improvising because we don't have cues. So they have to set the lighting scene to make it fit the stage and what's happening on stage, and then cut the lights at appropriate times, things like that. And they're often underappreciated. So I really wanted to bring that into the forefront and make a really like professional, tech-focused show. The other thing was, horror is notoriously hard to do well. It's a less is more genre. Like the more that you see the spooky thing, the less spooky it becomes, because whatever's in our brain is way scarier than anything you could ever be shown. So how do you do that in minimalist, mimed improv theatre, where the thing on stage that's spooky is just some dick going, ah! And how do you build that wonderful tension that horror has? So that's like the big question in my head. And to do a genre well, loosely speaking, there's three ways you can do to transcend the genre, to quote guy John Truby, who wrote some books on story. First way is to do something novel, something new, combine things in a new, interesting way. Game of Thrones is a really good example of this. It took the sort of political intrigue genre and mapped it onto a dark fantasy setting. So that was new, novel, people loved it. The second way is to sort of subvert or do a commentary or deconstruction of the genre itself. Cabin in the Woods is a really good example for horror, where it's looking at the genre and kind of playing with that, critiquing it in a sense in that film. And then the third way is the approach that I took, which is just do a really good job. And that's, I think, where it really fits the theme of Vibrant, right? Is deep down, I think we all kind of wish we were sophisticated individuals who read non-fiction novels, you know, by a campfire smoking a pipe or something every day, and love to get like these hard-hitting films that really make you think. But when I get home from work, a lot of the time I just want to put on the movie that I've seen 1,000 times because it's familiar. And familiar is fun. We love the familiar tropes and the cliches. And that media that does that really leans into the expected, is called comfort media. Some people, myself included, also kind of cheekily call it trash. You know, trashy romance, things like that. And I love trash. There's really good trash out there as well. So I really wanted to make a show that leaned into that comfort media aesthetic of people just enjoying the genre and the theme and delighting in the cliches and tropes when they turned up. So to do a horror well, we need to figure out what horror is first. And I went on a big deep dive into what horror is, and now this is going to be a very abridged version because I could talk for hours on end about it. Any horror fans in the audience? Raise. Yes, one emphatic hand. And a couple. Anyone here really struggle with horror because horror is spooky? Yeah, me too. I'm a wimp. And that's probably why I like horror comedy a lot, because it leans into the tropes without being too spooky. But horror, a lot of people think horror is about like the brutal and like animalistic nature of humanity, and like, oh my God, if given one day a year that we could just commit crimes, we'd all become murderers. Horror is actually quite misunderstood. It's actually about horror. Thematically, horror is the second most wholesome genre in the world, second only to children's stories. In terms of empathy, horror, more than any other genre out there, wants you to use your empathy. Here's an example. You are running from something. There is something out there. It is murdering people. It's after you now. You're running down a corridor. There's a door at the end. You know that you'll be safe if you can get into that door and you can bar the door behind you. It's after you. It's reaching for you, but you make it. You slam the door, bar the door. You're safe. You breathe. That's not horror. That's not horror at all. That is the precursor to horror. True horror comes when you realize your loved one is still outside. Right? And this always happens because the protagonist will always make the choice to leave that safe room to try and help their loved one, their child, their lover, their siblings, their best friends. Because the idea to the protagonist that they are safe while their loved one is potentially in danger is far worse than facing that horrible murderous monster. And that's probably the wrong choice. We in the audience kind of like, no, don't go, they're probably already dead. Like, you no, what are you doing? That is horror, because it got you to invest in the situation, put yourself in their shoes, puts you in a moral situation where you ask yourself, what would I do in that situation? We know the logical choice is staying behind, but emotionally, we want them to win. So horror wants you to empathize with the protagonist and then figure out, like, it basically wants you to analyze like your own values. As John Truby puts it, I'm paraphrasing, horror makes us confront our mortality and therefore reflect on whether or not we are good people. Horror's silly. It's fun. It's so camp. Like, there's someone in a latex suit chasing after people who are trying to figure out how to be good humans. This is why horror musicals work so well, because they're both so camp and fun and silly. So, that's kind of like how horror works and why I love horror, despite being an absolute scaredy cat myself. How do you make this work on stage? And I think the first thing is you need to draw people in. You need to have like a clear value proposition. People want to get drawn in. You want to bring them in with a really distinct style. Oh, we have music. It needs to be so dripping in style that people can't help but be sucked into this, like the cliche and everything. So how do we do that? Firstly, design. The inspiration for the name was this 1950s movie, It Came From Outer Space. There's a whole series. There's It Came From the Desert and a few others. It's a bad movie, don't watch it. They were advertising the 3D a lot more than the actual movie itself, and it shows. Yeah, it shows. But I really liked the aesthetic of the text, so I kind of stole that. And I wanted to make a design that was so generically fun. It was like summarized all of that era of horror so boldly together and be instantly recognizable. So I used AI to brainstorm. These are the glorious pictures. The Comhausit. So I love, this was the kind of aesthetic of 1950s horror movies. They had really bold greens, yellows, reds with stark blacks. There's, for some reason, always a house in the background and trees. And someone in the forefront screaming with 2 mouths. So I went with 3 mouths. This is the aesthetic that I came up with, which was, I took all the colors, put them together, and I went for the kind of like horror film poster meets shitty small town postcard, which I think has just, it's got that vibe that you're just kind of drawn in, and really silly. You'll be laughing scared. And all these elements, did them in Photoshop. I had all them, I could move them around. I could churn out a lot of different things. I wanted the cast to be able to excitedly advertise it as well, because I honestly don't know how advertising works in the era of social media. So I made a scared and a spooky version of every cast member, and I could churn these out as the cast changed. That's my favourite one. Be careful, or you'll get lost in D Woods. And what else? When people entered, I want it to be like a movie, right? Feel like a film. So people would enter. This is Bats, the stage. They'd enter, and there was a projection. We had a projector. I said there was tech involved. We looped between all the cast members who were on that night. There was a kind of this is kind of a more heavy-handed improv stage where we do have a little bit of an idea of what the set would be. So we had a vague indoor section, a vague outdoor section with just a square of AstroTurf and a picket fence, and then a vague neutral area. But people came in and they saw this. And then the lights go down like it does in a movie theatre. A voiceover comes on being like, please, it was a transatlantic kind of voice telling people to turn off their, dial phones or something. And then an intro credits played. I'd edited some intro credits to be like, wow, we're getting hyped, kind of like Twilight Zone intro sort of thing. And before the audience came in, they'd all filled out titles of the movie they were going to watch tonight. And I quickly chose the first one that kind of would work in an improv scene. Basically things that are beyond more than just a one-off joke. The first one that fit, and I threw it into the video. I had a lot of really, what is happened?
Sorry.
Oh.
OneDrive was verifying.
Ah. So you can't really see it, but this is the title we got on this night that we're filming, which was The Things in the Shed. And in the credits, as the movie is playing, this text is going on, and the audience is like, oh, how did they edit that into the video when I just wrote it? We also credited the person who wrote it, and their name came up here. And it was like, give a whoop, and the audience was like, woo! And the cast on the night would turn up, and then we'd have an establishing set, some sound effects would play, and then the show would start like a movie. So how do we do horror in improv itself. So I came up with a number of guidelines. This is a very bridged version, once again. Firstly, when the horror isn't present, when there's no horror, the horror is turned off, we're going full 1950s hammy acting. There's simple, direct dialogue. I went to the bake sale today and I bought 4 cakes. Oh, wonderful, we can do that for Jeremy's birthday party. You know, very boom, 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 boom. It provides a lot of energy. It's kind of silly. It's kind of comedic. And it is a little bit of a trick to get the audience kind of attached to the characters because they're fun, they're silly. But then when the horror is present, full 100% realism, we're dropping the 1950s for that, and you need to react as genuinely horrified as possible because the audience has empathized with you. It's no longer that character who is reacting and scared. It is you in the audience who is reacting scared. Horror is only as good as its reaction. If Ripley in Alien is just like, ugh, I've seen better alien suits. Like, you know, it dispels all that tension you've built up. So we really wanted the audience to feel the fear. It's a very character and a relationship heavy thing. Horror is about people, fundamentally. So you need people to empathize with to bring the audience into the realism or the suspended disbelief of a horror. So yeah, we made sure to focus on character and relationship. All the characters were also inspired by human virtues, just like, this character's very selfish. Something simple as that. Or this person used to trust and was burnt and now struggles with it. And then we forget about it completely, and it just naturally makes it thematically in line with horror. And finally, we don't show anything spooky until about a third through at least. Sometimes it was halfway through the show before anything got spooky. You'll see a lot of horror movies do this. We were allowed to allude to horror. We were allowed to add like an unsettling atmosphere. So for example, in the shed one, I think it was that scene there, we were talking about gardening, and it's like, oh yes, just remember that the tools are in the garage, not the shed. And then Leah on keys would go, boom! Audience would giggle because it's just silly. And then once we get over a third through, a character might just sit on the couch on one side and like face away from the centerpiece. The projector would dim down and a backlight would go up. The audience hadn't seen this before, and they would see this with some music playing. I didn't get the music on this. And that's the coolest moment. The audience is suddenly like, oh! And it works so well. Like having the backlight, it's a really good way to show the monster without showing the like goofy improviser on stage. We did learn that you can't mime things backstage. It looks really silly. So I cut out a lot of cardboard things, like guns, chainsaws, that look really good. And we do not show the monster until the very end, if at all. And we only show it in front of the screen, that is, when they're humanoid or they look acceptable on stage. So there was one show, which was the shed one, where they were like plant zombies. So we came out as like, ugh, zombies by the end, and it was fun. Additionally, deaths all happen off stage because you just can't show a good death in improv without it looking silly. Yeah, what's next? Negative space. This is a thing from film and graphic novels in horror. A lot of the time you'll see this kind of framing in a horror film where there's the character, normally the space leads the character where they're looking. You'll have it facing backwards. And if there was a door back here, you watching it will start getting a little unnerved. You're like, why is the door? Why are we looking at the door? So I'd actually end scenes. Get people to end scenes. Just imagine if this is the projector. This works really well, actually. Yeah, so I'd end a scene and I'd be sitting in the side here just like having a coffee, and the lights, whoever was on lights would decide when to bring it down. To the point where the audience might be like, is this intentional? Why are they, you want that kind of questioning, right? And then sometimes the backlight would come up and you would see the monster just standing there threateningly, not doing anything, just giving that tone. This is a big thing. This is kind of a surprise to a lot of people. The monster is not the villain. This is not true in all horror. Slashers, they're clearly the villain. There's a few other genres that they are clearly the villain. But a lot of the time, the monster is not the villain. It's a human story about virtues and vices and things like this, how to be good people. So you need, like, the villain is often more like a disaster movie. It's that idiot politician who's like, global warming doesn't exist, I'm selfish and only care about my own vested interests. The monster is an exacerbating factor like a natural disaster that forces the characters to face their conflicts and their things while eliminating people. It's like a really deadly lock-in episode, basically. We look here. So a death had just happened here, and you can see a big blood splat. So that's the tech I was talking about. This is a friend of mine made this open source software. Anyone can use it if you're interested. It's basically just a way. It's a genre agnostic thing where you can load on sound effects, images, videos. You can overlay text on anything, and it's just you create what you need to. I'm also doing a sitcom with this software, so it can do a lot of things. And I had several videos that when someone died, there would be like a noise and blood would splat on the screen above them. It was really cool. It's just a way to like do a lot of really cool looking things very easily. And that's kind of, I think, the driving force behind all art. It should be, I think. Leah here really carried the thing. Came up with a leitmotif that anytime something spooky would happen, you'd hear this music if you were listening. Really set the tone. Wouldn't have been good without Leah, that's for sure. Horror is very atmospheric. And it kind of led to this, where there were moments when characters went behind the screen, and people in the audience were like, oh no! And we had little props like fake guts, and the splatter happens there. That's kind of the vibe we were going for. We filmed one night. I'm still editing it. It's going to be online for free if you're interested to watch. And it is, the plant one. So comfort media. We were trying to make comfort media where people could forget about their lives. Did we do a good job? Here's a review we got from Regional News. Walking into It Came From Beyond the Script, I was tired, grumpy, and stressed. Walking out, I felt light, free, alive, and full of joy. I laughed till I nearly cried. That's exactly what good theatre should do. Provide an escape from the various abstract horrors of daily lives. Nailed it! Thank you.
I have seen that show, and it is amazing.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for creating it. Does anyone have any questions for Malcolm?
Are you going to do it again, the show?
It's actually been picked up by Impro Queensland in Brisbane, sorry. So I'm going to fly over there and start like training them into it up in the show. Also want to tour the country a little bit. I don't know if I'd love to do it again in Wellington, but I think it might be a while away. If that makes sense.
Because you first sort of piloted it in last year's Improv Fest Day.
Yeah. Gave it a go, really refined it for this version. Yeah.
How long have you been working with the voice for?
2 years probably. It was probably more than that now. 3 years? Yes. It's just kind of been in the back of my head. A lot of little pieces of inspiration. Like I saw one show that was it was a sci-fi that had like a text-to-speech AI that someone could control. And I was like, that's cool. And I started piecing together a lot of like inspiration. And yeah, horror is just fun. Yeah.
You mentioned you were doing a sitcom one.
Yes. What's the story around it?
Yeah.
So I was just thinking about other ways that I could use the software. And 90s sitcoms, like someone jokingly said you could do like that intro where they're just like, and their name comes up. And it was just from that. It's just, yeah. Hope to perform that in Wellington at some point. It's a lot less effort than this, that's for sure. But yeah, just the stock footage and the boom, 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 boom between scenes. Yeah.
All of your skills in theater and this comedy part and your creativity and structuring a story or a non-story that you have to structure on, improvising it. Where did this all come from? Did you study something? Did you just, it's natural?
So I've been doing this for like, I don't know, 17, 18 years now, like just improv in general. I think like so I started in high school, as a lot of people do, just like, oh, this is a fun club that we can do dumb games and be silly with friends. But I would say I've always been obsessed with stories and storytelling. I was that kid who like you'd give a novel and they would lose 3 nights of sleep because, you know, they'd be hiding it from their parents and be like, oh, yes. Yeah, and then just refine through practice. Yeah, we used to make a completely new show every 2 weeks down in Dunedin where I used to perform. So I got really good at making shows and seeing what works, what doesn't work. A lot of very short feedback cycle for experimentation as well.
It's kind of a what if. I'm assuming because you would be dreaming a lot, but some of your dreaming involved taking this way of working into a feature film?
The way of working in terms of like the horror and the
horror improv. So I know there's great things you can do in theatre, and I know there'll be some constraints in making a film around this. But what a really interesting creative process to bring into making a film. You've got a broad idea at the start, and improv your way right through this film.
Yeah, I think like that doesn't really excite me. So the reason I love improv is I love to be surprised.
Yes.
And like I used to do scripted theatre as well and things like that. And I don't know, it just doesn't scratch that itch. It's the same thing every time, and I get bored very easily. That might be the real reason. Yeah, and improv is a very present thing. I would liken it most to, like, film is, say, a gorgeous masterpiece painting, whereas improv is like the street sketch artist, that to the person there, it is far more special, but you really had to be there for it. So it doesn't really translate to recordings, despite the fact I'm doing it, very well. Yeah.
Any other questions? Me again. How do you work with being also, if I understood well, a scientist?
I'm actually
You don't do that anymore.
No, I'm a sellout. I love, so yeah, we were having a chat earlier. I studied, I did a PhD in physics, of all things, and loved the work, hated the job. So it was really interesting stuff we were dealing with, but then academics, and not really a big fan of university structures, and it's a very isolated thing, very like lonely. So I also wanted money. So I now work in data. I'm a manager of people. Yeah. Does that change your question at all?
I relate a lot.
But yeah, like I think I do have one thing that's really nice, and I'm sure a lot of people here can probably empathize, where like 5 o'clock comes and I don't care about my job anymore because my job just fuels my passions, right? It's not my job is my passion. Yeah.
What about making, because you mentioned climate change before, like horror about climate change, like what?
Well, that's interesting. So horror is a kind of unique genre in that it often reflects the fears of society at the time. So you go to the 50s and there were mutants, there were aliens and things, and it was basically like the fears were around nuclear war and mutations and things, technology basically going too far. Nowadays, a lot of horror is more psychological, like mental horror. It's more about like being an alien in your own body. There's a lot of things around that. So there was a period in like I think the 90s or 80s or something where horror was about climate change. There still is a little bit about that. I guess less so. People moved on. So yeah, it is possible. I think for this context, because horror, or the way that I've set up horror for this is very close to disaster movies, I think it muddies the water a little bit too much. So I personally wouldn't go there just thinking on it, because I want to sell the horror cliches, not the the disaster movie kind of thing. Yeah, and if it did, it would be like a mutant from climate change or something. It's doable, really doable.
Just one. So you did a run of 5 nights,
Mm-hmm.
and so you had a different starting point each night.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
So the only thing that was, like we had a loose structure, but it's more just like, oh yeah, tonight it's going to be first scene you two, second scene you two, third scene you two, go. When the audience saw the title that was chosen, that was the first time the actors saw the title as well. Everything that came from that was completely made up. They didn't know like where the establishing shot would be. So like I think it was a car, and we heard like car noises, and a car was projected up top, and then they're like, oh God, we're in a car, all right. And
I think that was the night I went.
oh yeah. Yeah, and the title really influences things. Like that one was 3 Knocks at Midnight, I think it was called. So the spooky thing was just like knocks happening, and everyone's like, whoa, with spooky music, and everything is made up. It's a question that people a lot of the time have, is like, what specifically is made up? Like everything. No one knows who the characters are going to be. No one knows where they're going to be, or anything, or even the title. Yeah.
Not even the personality, as you said, like you're going to be the selfish? Or?
No, they know themselves, because they've probably, or they might not have, but they they keep it to themselves. They're just like, today I'm going to be selfish.
Okay.
And then they start in a car. It turns out they're in a relationship with this person. They didn't plan that, but they're like, but I'm selfish. Yeah.
And just a question kind of related to that. Obviously you guys are experts and know what you're doing, but do you ever kind of halfway through, or do you ever kind of get to a scene where you're like, oh shit, what do we do? And then how do you kind of deal?
Always. Yeah. It's very, very common.
We never know, but
So there's a lot of like little tricks, I guess. So the most common thing is like you probably have heard people tease it, like joke about it all the time in media and movies. The phrase "yes and." So it's more just being like, if you're confused, don't care about the big things or the big picture. Just like you said one word, how do I react to that? Yeah. And you just try to ground yourself in this present moment between you and this other person. And you also have a lot of people who are not on stage who can come in with something. Yeah. So as long as you trust the people around you to have your back, yeah, you're just comfortable on stage. There's a delight to it, you know. You're on stage, you're like, I have no idea what's going on.
how do you know when like people are just stuck? I mean, because you've been doing it for, rather than there being like a really long silence and being obvious, but because you've been doing it for a long time, do you have some intuition that, oh, I better come on now, or I better, that they seem to be stuck?
Yeah, definitely.
Please explain your intuition.
Yeah.
You have 5 minutes now.
5 minutes. So, firstly, you do. there's a degree of suspension of disbelief in improv, even when you are, and this is kind of the joy of watching an improv show, is that you suspend your disbelief that this is someone making things up. But you can also see that they are processing and they're thinking, and like, because in improv you are as much an audience member as the people in the audience, because you get to experience the story at the same time. You haven't rehearsed it a billion times, you know, it's fresh. So you do kind of see people's brains ticking a little bit. You study the form rather than specifics. So like if a painter would practice, you know, here's how you use oil paints. Here's how you use watercolors. You practice the techniques around that. We do that in improv with storytelling. So we learn how to do good stories, how to do efficient dialogue. And a lot of the time you can find that people will start kind of waffling, or they'll be like, there's a lot of technical terms in improv. One is hedging, where it's like, we know that you have to do this thing. You know, it's like a horror. It's like, what's in the cupboard? Oh, by the way, do you want a cup of tea? You know, like that's hedging. You're putting off what you need to do. You know you need to do this. So that's often a sign that someone is a little bit confused or lost. There's a lot of other little things like that you start picking up on. Yeah. But most of the time you trust that the person on stage, it depends how, like, skill level of improv, experience level. Most of the time you just trust that they can figure things out themselves. Because coming on is kind of derailing. Was that 5 minutes? Did I do it?
You did it.
Yes!
You did it. Well done.
Any final thoughts before I leap up and let you go to work? Fantastic.
Cool.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much for
everyone.
coming.